Jai Hind, Namaste, hello, and a very warm welcome to UPSC for everyone. My name is Abhinav, and in this video, we'll be discussing the Hindu and Indian Express for the date 31st of October 2020. Now, for your convenience, I have added timestamps in the description. So, if you want to skip to a particular news, please use those timestamps. And the free PDFs for selected topics of this video are available on my Telegram channel, the link to which is in the description. Also, if you like our videos, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss out on any new videos that we post. Also, please give us a thumbs up if you like this video. So without wasting your time, let's get started. So starting with the Hindu, active cases fall below 6 lakh after 85 days. So the problem is still very much there, and Europe is experiencing second wave. India will also, so please take care. Then import barrier will not be perpetual. So this statement has been made by Niti Aayog Vice Chairman Rajiv Kumar. So let us see what he's saying. So excerpts from Niti Aayog Vice Chairman Rajiv Kumar's address to the Confederation of Asia Pacific Chambers. So incentives for manufacturing investments to be extended to 9 to 10 sectors from 4 at present. Here he's talking about the PLI scheme, which we have discussed in detail. Then protection from imports won't be perpetual. That any tariff protection to promote local manufacturing in India will come with an inbuilt sunset clause. Now this sunset clause means that it will be for a particular time frame. After a particular time frame, those protections and those facilities that have been extended, they will be removed. Then India not turning into a protectionist or closed economy. He says what India is doing right now, every other economy is trying to do that, every major economy. So there's nothing protectionist or closed about our steps. Then incentives will operate within the multilateral trading rules framework. So whatever incentives we are promising under the PLI scheme, they will also be available here. So this is about it. So new wage code bars bonus for those facing sex abuse charges. This is important for your paper 1 social issues and paper 2 governance. Now let us see. So we already know all the labor laws we are bringing under 4 labor codes, right? One of them is the wage code. Now, there is a proposal under this new wage code that if someone indulges in sexual harassment in any form, then that person would be denied their annual bonus. Now, as of now, your annual bonus you get under the Payment of Bonus Act 1965. But as per the existing law, bonus dues are barred only in case of employees dismissed for fraud, violent conduct, and theft or sabotage. It does not cover sexual harassment, right? So under this present law, no mention of sexual harassment, but under the new wage code, there will be a mention of sexual harassment. Now there are also internal complaints committees. So basically there was a Vishakha case after which Supreme Court mandated that every firm should have internal complaints committee, so that whenever there is a complaint, it should be first of all handled by this committee. Then this committee should give its suggestions. Then if those suggestions are not acceptable or the victim does not get justice, then she can approach the courts. So this is under the Prevention of Sexual Harassment at Workforce Law guidelines. Firms are required to form internal complaints committee to inquire into complaints. Now the committee is required to make recommendation to employers on the actions that have to be taken on the complaint. It also has the powers to decide if someone is guilty and report it further to police, but not all cases translate to police action. Now, location of incident, this is a very peculiar point that under the current law, first of all, there is no mention of sexual harassment, right? And it also says that even if you do things like theft, violent conduct, but outside office premises, then there is no legal basis for them to deny your bonus. It is location specific. That means if you commit these mistakes in the employer's premises, only then you can be denied your bonus. But this new provision that they are going to add, they are saying it is going to be independent of location. That means any form of sexual harassment, any place, you would be denied your bonus. So this is about it. Then page 6 editorial, time for Sponge Cities mission in India. So this person, he talks about the Hyderabad floods. Now this is important because this is covering your urban floods. I've already told you urban floods come under your paper 1 geography as well as paper 3, right? Disaster management. Now he tells us that this urban flood or the flood that happened in Hyderabad recently, it was not because of the typical reasons that are being given out, that there was excess of rainfall or the sewage system of the city is antiquated. He's saying it is a failure of urban planning which neglects local communities as well as the ecology of the region. So that is the major or the main root cause behind this problem in Hyderabad, and this can be extrapolated to any other city in India, right? Then he tells us about a concept of sponge cities. So what are the sponge cities? We'll be seeing that, right? And then he tells us how to achieve this concept of sponge cities in India. So it is a very good read, and these examples that he's given and the suggestions, they're very, very good. And this is again one of those things that you should save for future, because these are evergreen suggestions that he's given, right? So let us get into it. So first he debunks existing theories. First is the unprecedented rainfall. Then he gives figures and he tells that the floods of October 2020 occurred because we did not discharge water in time. And when they actually did discharge, it was all of a sudden and uncontrolled manner. So it was like a double whammy. The figures you can read, it is not necessary for me to explain it, right? The second is antiquated infrastructure. So he's saying that the areas that suffered from floods in 1908, 2001, 2005 have not been hit by 2020 floods. So the reason must be something else. So he's saying that this narrative conceals the fact that city has grown rapidly into areas where there was no drainage infrastructure to begin with. So this is the story of every other urban center in India. Unplanned growth. It is planned for a very small region. Then there are offshoots, and these are all unplanned colonies. And these unplanned colonies do not have drainage infrastructure. So of course there will be problems like that, right? And as the city grew beyond its original limits, not much was done to address the absence of adequate drainage system. So this is typical of unrecognized or unauthorized colonies within urban areas in our country. Neglecting ecological support. Now see, this is the important point that he's making, that we are neglecting the incremental land use change, and basically there has been rampant encroachment of wetlands. Now wetlands I've explained before as well under the Ramsar Convention, and the role of wetlands is very, very important for management of flood and also water filtration, right? So these are the areas that provide a cushion, or like a sponge, they absorb the excess water. But these wetlands have been encroached by greedy land developers and unauthorized constructions. So that is really taking a toll. So particularly those commons which provide us necessary ecological support, called the wetlands. Now he also says that communities are left out. Now these reasons that are being given out, they disavow the role of local communities in managing local ecosystems, people with traditional rights for fishing and farming. Now this lesson has been learned by others throughout the world. It is high time that in India we should learn this lesson. So we need to start paying attention to the management of our wetlands by involving local communities. Very, very important, because they are directly dependent on wetlands. Wetlands provide them with fish and other source of energy and food. So they have more stakes in them. So they'll be better able to manage them, right? They have a very organic relationship. The risk is going to increase year after year with changing rainfall patterns and a problem of urban terrain which is incapable of absorbing, holding and discharging water. Now this is very, very important point. Problem of urban terrain which is incapable of absorbing, holding and discharging water. So what happens, see, all the roads are concretized in the name of development, right? Or they are metal roads. Now what happens, that whenever there is rainfall, they cannot actually absorb the water, and that water does not reach into the ground. So our groundwater level is not getting recharged because of these problems. So what happens, it actually converts into a flood because the land has lost its capability to absorb, hold and discharge water. Now the solution that he's talking about, making cities permeable, that is allowing water to seep through. Urban floods on this scale cannot be contained by municipal authorities alone, nor they can be dealt with state government. They cannot be managed without concerted and focused investments of energy and resources, and they need a mission mode organization with active participation of civil society organizations at the metropolitan scale. So it has to be a very big scale, metropolitan scale, and they need focused and concerted investments of energy and resources and active participation of civil society. Now here comes the very important point, sponge cities and how to attain them. So we need a mission that mitigates flood risk and provides pathway to water security. The most promising idea across the world at this time appears to be the idea of sponge cities. Now, like a sponge can absorb water, these cities should be able to absorb water. The idea of sponge city is to make cities more permeable as to hold and use the water which falls upon it. So say there are double advantages. Number one, it will mitigate urban floods. Number two, it will also help in solving the problem of water availability in cities, because this water will again go to reservoirs, right, like lakes, or will go for recharging of underground water. So this will help solving the problems, right? Sponge cities absorb the rainwater, which is then naturally filtered by soil and allowed to reach urban aquifers. So aquifers are basically underground or subsurface or surface sources of water, and they get recharged by this rainwater only, right? And how does the water get filtered? See, soil has many small pores through which water seeps down. So all the impurities are largely, the physical impurities are largely filtered. Then some chemical impurities, some reactions take place in the soil, so they help in removing those impurities as well. Others, we can treat them before basically supplying them to the cities. Now this allows for extraction of water from ground through urban or peri-urban wells. The water can be treated easily and used for city water supply. Now how should we get it? So this implies contiguous open green sources, interconnected waterways, and channels and ponds across neighborhoods that can naturally detain and filter water. So he's talking about that the different aquifers, lakes, ponds, wells, they should all be connected. They should be uninhabited flow. There should be open green spaces that can actually help or allow the filtration of water or trickling down of water, right? So he's talking about that. And there should also not be any disturbance in natural flow area of the water. It implies support for urban ecosystems, biodiversity, and new cultural and recreational opportunities. Of course, if water bodies are revived in any city, then they will help in urban ecosystem, they will enrich the biodiversity, and they will also provide new culture and recreational opportunities. So see, again, a benefit. So these are basically ecosystem benefits. So there are some economics benefits, then there are some benefits vis-a-vis disaster mitigation, and then there are cultural benefits as well, right? How to achieve? Now very, very important. He says that this can be delivered effectively through an urban mission along the lines of Amrut, Hriday, or smart cities. Now he's addressing 4 top priority areas to do that. On a top priority, such a mission should address the following. So number 1, we should have a wetland policy. He says in most of our lakes, the shallow ends, which often lie beyond the full tank level, have disappeared. So see, for example, this is a lake, right? Now these are the shallow levels which help in absorbing excess water, but these have been encroached in the name of construction. There are buildings that claim we are overlooking a lake. So basically how they are overlooking a lake, they are encroaching upon the wetlands. These shallow ends are best characterized as wetlands, sometimes owned by private individuals, other times existing as ecological commons. Now, regardless of the ownership, land use on even this small scale needs to be regulated by development control. So number 1, you need to have a proper wetland policy and you need to control the land use. Then watershed management and emergency drainage plan. There should be clearly enunciated policy and law. Now, what is watershed? The whole path where the water flows is known as watershed. So it should be uninhibited flow, because if you stop the flow or divert it, then it leads to problems like urban floods. Urban watersheds are micro ecological drainage systems shaped by contours of the terrain. Very, very important. So this is the definition of urban watersheds: micro ecological drainage systems shaped by the contours of terrain. So if the terrain is sponge-like, then this watershed will be very rich in underground water. But if it is not like that, then this watershed would be a very distorted one and it won't help in any water conservation. It would just lead to runoff and also floods. Then he also says there should be detailed documentation And we need to consider, for that documentation, we need to consider natural boundaries such as watershed instead of governance bodies like electoral wards for shaping a drainage plan. So this is very important because see, the natural boundaries are important. We make artificial human boundaries and that then interfere with natural boundaries and that creates problem, right? Then he's talking about some authorities that they should work together. Then ban against terrain alteration, again very important. This terrain alteration has lasting irreversible damage and it has been done by builders, property owners and public agencies by flattening terrain and altering drainage routes. Without doubt, terrain alteration needs to be strictly regulated and a ban on any further alteration of terrain needs to be introduced. Now important, cities are becoming increasingly impervious to water because concretization and metallized road, not because of increased built up but also because of nature of materials used, hard non-porous construction material that make the soil impervious. So to improve cities' capacity to absorb water, new porous materials and technologies must be encouraged or mandated across scales. Now what are those? He's talking about biosoils and retention systems, then permeable material for road and pavement, drainage systems which allow storm water to trickle into ground, and green roofs and harvesting systems in buildings. So these are very practical things and they are already being used throughout the world. So it is high time that we should also use them, right? Again, you see very, very good points he's making. These not only reduce runoff and load on infrastructure, but also help keep water in the city for later use. And finally, he says that stop the blame game and start acting, because what happens whenever there is a problem, different agencies and different governments, they start blaming each other. They never take action. So there is never a long-term solution for anything. So he's saying just stop playing the blame game and start taking action. So this is about this editorial. Very, very good. The concept of sponge city and how to attain it. Then this one, terror in Nice. So we've already know what has happened. Some points. It is important to understand the enemy, the Islamist terrorists, those who are inspired by the ideology of organizations such as Al-Qaeda and Islamic State, see the world as an arena of clash of civilizations, like I told you yesterday. Driven by a perverted interpretation of religion, they are ready to unleash violence against anybody who does not subscribe to their worldview. The fight against jihadists, a minuscule minority among the world's Muslims, but a potent threat to societies, given their embrace of violence and a vicious ideology, should be mindful of not allowing them to sow discord on the basis of religious identities. This is the biggest challenge before the French president Emmanuel Macron. Mr. Macron, who earlier this month said Islam is in crisis, should lead a united response to terrorism that does not posit French values against any belief system. The fight is for civilizational values, for democracy, secularism, freedom, and equality against radical Islam, a medieval ideology that has equipped itself with modern weapons. It is important for the world that France wins this fight. Then this one, signs of monsoons. So let us see. So in this one, first he tells that India has got 2 consecutive years of excess rainfall. This year, 2020 and 2019, more than 105% of long period average, never got since 30 years. So I've already told you that long period average, we recalibrated it to 88 centimeter, 1 centimeter down, right? And this is an average of rainfall over a place for a given period, right? That is why it is known as long period average and is helpful in making prediction and forecasts, right? We've discussed this in detail in earlier videos. Now, he says that India is probably in a rainy epoch. He says that there are always shifts. 20 to 30 years, there would be somewhat dry conditions, then rainy conditions. So now he's saying that we are in a rainy epoch, which would bring problems like floods, landslides, etc. So authorities need to prepare for that. Then the third point that this one makes is that this year the IMD undertook a long overdue revision of the onset and withdrawal dates of the monsoon in India, and we've discussed this as well. Now the withdrawal date is 15th October, right? But this withdrawal this year was much later, right? Then he talks about the northeast monsoon, which is the reversal of monsoons, right? So the southwest monsoon's withdrawal heralds the advent of northeasterly winds that bring in northeast monsoon to parts of peninsular Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu. Now see, this is the advancing monsoon. It is also known as southwest monsoon. Now why southwest? Whenever we name winds from the prevailing direction. So these winds are originating from south-west direction. That is why it is called southwest monsoon. And similarly, retreating monsoon, which is known as northeast monsoon, because it is originating from or blowing from the northeastern side, right? So that is why this is known as northeastern monsoon. Now, there is one thing called wind, which is the horizontal flow of air, and the other thing is air current, which is the vertical flow of air. All of them are interrelated and interconnected, but you will be able to understand and appreciate this when we discuss the whole air current, air circulation, tricellular model, and then you'd be able to understand the whole phenomena of monsoon, right? So as of now, just know that this is advancing monsoon, southwest, and retreating northeast, and it is causing rainfall in some parts. See, this southern part of Andhra and north part of Tamil Nadu and other parts. So these are the regions where they get rainfall during the winters in north, right? So this is the whole thing. Now this northeast monsoon is significant for agriculture in those regions, right? And it contributes around 10 to 12% of India's annual rainfall. This is against the southwest monsoon 75 to 80%. Then he says that there has been less research about northeast monsoons and it is more susceptible to variations. So studies show that northeast monsoon rainfall displays significant variation and climate models are fairly inaccurate in their forecasts of unfolding over the subcontinent. Then he says that there have been significant investments in supercomputing infrastructure to stimulate weather as well as to tune forecasts to go beyond just giving rainfall estimates and factor in the potential damage of floods and cyclones. We are using supercomputers, right? So he says that now scientists should pay more effort and design research programs that better analyze the vagaries of the northeast monsoon. Now, along with understanding of how climate is changing locally, India needs better science to prepare more effectively in terms of disaster management plans and improve resilience in a warming world. So this is all that this editorial is saying. Now to page 9. Center denies claim of Chinese transgression. So if you remember, yesterday there was an article where this former member of parliament, Mr. Chewang, had made some claims, right? But I did not discuss that because it did not name any source. It was just hearsay that his sources have told him. Had it been something that would have been substantiated by satellite imagery or something concrete, I would have definitely discussed it. So that is the only thing. You should always check the veracity of something before you actually start talking about it. So here, PIB fact checked this person on Twitter and it fact checked the Hindu that this is not right news, right? Then page 10, Malabar naval exercise to kick off next week. So we have discussed Malabar many times. So this is nothing now. So it is just the formalization of Quad. This is the first time Australia will be joining after 2007, right? And Australia again started requesting since 2017 and now we have finally allowed them. Now this will be carried on in 2 phases. Phase 1 would be carried out in the Bay of Bengal from November 3 to 6 and second phase in the Andaman Sea from November 17 to 20. And it began as a bilateral exercise. We've been discussing all of this with the US in 1992 and became trilateral with inclusion of Japan in 2015 and now quadrilateral Quad with inclusion of Australia 2020, right? Then Supreme Court issues mirror order in child custody. So this is some interesting concept. Let us see what is mirror order. We are not concerned with the case, just the concept of mirror order. So what is a mirror order? When a competent court in India passes a series of conditions for transfer of custody of a child of a parent living abroad, an identical or mirror order is passed by an equally competent court to ensure that the conditions are met. For example, there was a couple, right? And unfortunately they separated, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on the circumstances. Now they're living in different countries, but they have children or child. Now they would be fighting over the custody. So what happens? One wins custody and the other just gets the visitation rights, or there are some terms. So these mirror orders are made by competent courts in both the countries from where the child is going to go to the country where he's going, right? So both the origin and destination country, they pass similar laws so that there is no ambiguity in the terms of the settlement, and it is also there to check the incidence of kidnapping by parents, right? This happens sometime. So this is what is the concept of mirror order. So it ensures that contradictory judicial orders are not passed and is considered a remedy against transnational parental abduction of children. It is passed to ensure that courts of the country where the child is being shifted are aware of the arrangements which were made in the country where he had ordinarily been residing, so from the source country to the destination country. Such an order would also safeguard the interests of the parent who is losing custody so that rights of visitation and temporary custody are not impaired. So this is the concept of mirror orders, and this is important for your paper 1, and it could also be important for your PT examination, right? Then as prices soar, NAFED to import onions. So NAFED is a central cooperative. Now it is going to import onions. We have already discussed why the prices are soaring, because of untimely rainfall, right? That led to destruction of standing crop, post-harvest losses, and that also disturbed the storage pattern, right? And because of that, there was negative market sentiment, right? So in the anticipation of future shocks in supply, the suppliers or the sellers, they ramped up the prices. So that led to a whole spiral, and now the onion prices are soaring. So we are already importing onions from Egypt, Afghanistan and Turkey. And if you remember, we also discussed that this is a seasonal thing. It happens every year this season, right? But this time this problem has been exacerbated because of the untimely rainfall in major onion producing states like Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, etc., right? Then CPCB flags pollution control at rail stations. So we all know, we all live in India. So the condition of rail stations now, it has improved, but yet there is so much more to do. So CPCB has flagged that there should be control of pollution, both air, sound, land pollution at category 1 or class 1 railway stations. So let us see what it is saying. Now CPCB has insisted that the Ministry of Railways devise a modern environmental management plan to control air, water and noise pollution at major stations, and the major concern here is the noise pollution. Poor quality of environment parameters, particularly noise levels, has been an issue of concern at major stations. Now the CPCB had called for formation of a joint committee comprising of railway and state government local body officials to ensure basic civic amenities and improve environment conditions at class 1 stations. A separate template on environmental assessment and management would be prepared for all metro stations, so they would also be covered. The CPCB has now advised the Ministry of Railways shall be responsible for implementation of various pollution control measures. So CPCB is advising that the Ministry of Railway be made responsible for implementing all the pollution control measures at their respective railway stations, right? Then page 13, World, just the headline, second arrest after French knife attack. Then Mahathir slams tech giant for removing posts. So he's former premier of Malaysia, and look at what he's saying. He basically made statements on Twitter and Facebook that Muslims have right to kill millions of French people. Now see, the problem is not religion, problem is not people per se, problem is such people, these leaders who mislead their followers, right? So he basically traced history that French in the course of history have killed many of people, many were Muslims as well. See the kind of statements these people make, these idiot people, and they become prime ministers and heads of states. Then anti-France protests in Muslim countries. So countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, Palestine, even in our country, there were protests against France. Then China gears up for strategic period. So if you remember, we discussed they are having a plenum where all the major leaders of Communist Party, they come together and they're going to discuss about the 14th 5-year plan, right? And their midterm plan till 2035. Now they call this period as an important strategic period for fulfilling ambitions at home and abroad. So they have come up with 3 goals to be achieved by 2025, 2027 and 2035. So what is the emphasis? Boosting domestic consumption and innovation. Then number 2, National Security and Defense Modernization Plan ahead of PLA's Sentinel. So it is going to cover 100 years in 2027, and a Vision 2035, a long-term economic blueprint that calls for big leaps in economic strength and technological prowess. Now $15 trillion GDP, the communique said that China's GDP would cross 100 trillion yuan, around $15 trillion this year, and the new economic blueprint, which did not announce a specific GDP target. So they are not announcing specific GDP target because they know their growth is not that good, would broadly push for China to double its GDP and current per capita GDP of $10,000 by 2035. And if you remember, we've discussed an editorial where they said that their per capita GDP would be stuck in the middle range. They will never really be a rich country. While the communique mainly focused on the economic issues, it also outlined China's national security plans and a goal to establish the PLA as a modern force by 2027, because 100 years, to realize what it called the unity of a rich country and a strong army. It stressed the importance of information and strengthened military training and war preparation. So big words again. Just you remember these three goals by respectively 2025, 2027 and 2035, right? 2025 boosting domestic consumption, innovation. 2027 national security and defense modernization because 100 years of PLA. And 2035 long-term economic blueprint that calls for big leap in economic strength. So doubling their current per capita GDP, right? So this is about it. Then very unfortunate news, 14 die as quake strikes Turkey, Greek islands. So this quake originated in the Aegean Sea. Then 15th Finance Commission to hand in report on November 9. So basically right now there's nothing to discuss about what they're going to say. Let them hand over the report and then we'll discuss it. I'll just give you an introduction to Finance Commission. So about the Finance Commission, this is formed under Article 280, which says that every 5 years the president shall formulate a Finance Commission, right? It is formed under Article 280. It acts as an instrument to divide proceeds of divisible tax between states and union government. Now, what are the functions of the Finance Commission of India? First, the net tax proceeds distribution to be divided between center and states and the allocation of the same between the states, right? So for example, current one has said 42% of the net tax proceeds will be given by center to the states. Now there is a formula of dividing that 42% among different states. Then the principles governing grants in aid to states by center out of the Consolidated Fund of India. I've already told you what is Consolidated Fund of India. The principles governing grants in aid to the states by center out of the Consolidated Fund of India. So I've already told you what is Consolidated Fund of India, what is Contingency Fund of India, and what is public accounts. So all these grants in aid, they follow a special formula depending on the conditions, the geographical, the population, the socio-economic conditions, and on those principles, these grants are divided among different states. So the principles again by Finance Commission. Then the steps required to extend the Consolidated Fund of State to boost the resources of panchayats and municipalities, basically to augment the financial resources of the local bodies in states on the basis of recommendations of State Finance Commission. And then finally, any other matter referred to it by President in the interests of sound finance. So broad four functions. Number one, division of tax between center and states. Then number two, grant in aid. Then number three, augmenting the resources of local bodies. And number four, any other matter referred to it by the president in interests of sound finance. Now the commission's recommendations along with an explanatory memorandum with regard to the actions done by the government on them are laid before the houses of the parliament under Article 281. So these recommendations of the Finance Commissions, they are not binding on the Government of India. Generally and usually Government of India always accepts those recommendations, but they are not binding on Government of India. So Government of India tables a report with the explanatory memorandum about the actions they took on the recommendations of Finance Commission. Now the powers of Finance Commission, it has sufficient powers to exercise its functions within its activity domain. Under the Code of Civil Procedure 1908, it has all the powers of a civil court. It can call witness, ask for production of public document or record from any office or court. So this is about your Finance Commission. Then this small news, bill on coastal shipping up for comment. So the Ministry of Shipping has invited stakeholder comments on the draft Coastal Shipping Bill 2020. Now the bill proposes to exempt Indian flag vessels from needing trading license for coastal trade while imposing additional conditions on foreign ships for being eligible, such as nationality of crew and requiring whole or part of foreign vessels to be built in India. So basically coastal trade would be in the coastal waters of India, right? If you are not clear about coastal waters, I have explained UNCLOS previously as well, and there's a video on my channel about South China Sea. It has the portion for UNCLOS. There you can understand all about coastal waters, territorial water, and then international waters. It also provides for strategic plan which will recommend ways to integrate inland waterways route with maritime coastal transport. Coastal shipping is now governed under Merchant Shipping Act 1958. This is your PT point, that coastal shipping comes under the Merchant Shipping Act 1958. Now starting with the Express, crisis on LOC worst in decades, India response firm and mature, says Shringla. So our foreign secretary, he's in France, so he made this statement, just the statement, right? Then Future builds up 1,000 crore war chest in arbitration battle with Amazon. So we've discussed already what is this trouble between Amazon and Future, right? Amazon bought 49% in Future last year, right, for a 2,000 crore deal. Now Future has sold its retail merchant business, Big Bazaar, Food Hall, and its retail business, right? The clothing one. So now Amazon is saying that this is in violation of their contract. Future has sold it to Reliance. Now Amazon is somewhat not comfortable with Reliance because it can give it a competition. So now Amazon has gone to SIAC, Singapore Arbitral, right, to get an emergency halt on this, right? And yesterday we also discussed it has written to SEBI not to clear this deal, this acquisition. Why? Because Amazon says that it had the call option that it could acquire more shares of Future, but Future did not let Amazon exercise that option. Then again, Amazon says that Future was mandated to communicate to Amazon any deal that it was going to take. It did not tell. Then there was also a right to refusal. For example, if Future was going to make any deal, then Amazon could refuse it. Then there was also non-competitive clause in their agreement. That means that Future and Amazon would not be competing in the same scenario or in the same market. So now Future is also gearing up. It has built a 1,000 crore war chest. So in order to factor in all the possible future liabilities in its arbitration tussle with global e-commerce giant, Kishore Biyani's Future Group is learned to have set aside rupees 1,000 crore in an escrow account as a safeguard measure. The amount later could be raised to 1,500 crore, equal to the total investment made by Amazon. The company's top management is also of the view that the deal with the Reliance Retail Ventures will go ahead as planned and will be completed. Now, legal sources say that if Future decided to go ahead with the deal, it would leave Amazon with no option but to either approach the Indian court with an plea seeking a stay on the deal or to approach the Singapore International Arbitration Center for an early hearing in the matter. We've all discussed this. Now, Section 9 of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act provides the option to parties to ask the court to pass orders to preserve the condition of goods or to take interim custody of its same until the final order is passed. Future Retail had announced that it would sell by way of slump sale the retail and wholesale business of its supermarket chain Big Bazaar, premium food supply unit Food Hall, and fashion and clothes supermarket, Brand Factories Retail and wholesale units to Reliance Retail. The deal had run afoul of Amazon that had bought a 49% stake in Future Coupons, which translates to roughly 3.58% in Future Retail. So in Future Retail, they have just 3.58%, but the parent company Future Coupons, they have 49% stake. In its objections, Amazon had said that the deal, apart from being a violation of non-compete clause, that means they would not be competing in the same field, right? And a right of first refusal pact was also denying it the call option, which was part of the agreement which it had signed with Future Coupons. Now, the call option gave it the right within 3 to 10 years of the agreement to buy more shares. It said the deal also required Future Group to inform Amazon before entering into any agreement with third parties. So this case is going to go big now. Then government plans to leverage microcredit scheme for street vendor database. So let us see what is this about. Basically, this is about PM Swanidhi scheme, which was about giving rupees 10,000 microcredit to the street vendors as a working capital to revive their business, which had shut because of the lockdown. Now, under this scheme, government has got access to a large database about these street vendors, about half of the street vendors in India. Basically, estimates say that there are about 50 to 60 lakh street vendors in India. So out of them, 25 lakh had applied for loans under this scheme. So now this is a personal initiative of PM Modi. He's saying that since we have the database, now we can integrate this database and allow these vendors access to more schemes. Basically, in the recent Mann Ki Baat, Prime Minister spoke very highly of a Momo vendor, how he used this 10,000 rupees microcredit and also access other government schemes. So that inspired the PM. So let us see what it is about. Government of India plans to prepare a socio-economic profile of street vendors to bring them in the net of eligible government schemes and turn PM Swanidhi into a comprehensive poverty alleviation program. The PM Street Vendors Atmanirbhar scheme, the Swanidhi microcredit program, a loan of rupees 10,000 is extended as working capital to street vendors. Now there are an estimated 50 to 60 lakh street vendors, and out of that around 25 lakh street vendors have applied for loans under the program. Now this has also provided identification to vendors. The scheme has brought 5.37 lakh new street vendors, hitherto not identified by municipal bodies, into mainstream by arranging letters of recommendations for them to apply for the loans. So this is also formalizing that part of economy, helping them. So we could be opening bank accounts and their money could be entering into bank accounts. Similarly, if they have proper identification proof, they could also apply for loans. Now, as per the Street Vendors Protection of Livelihood and Regulation of Street Vending Act 2014, states are supposed to carry out periodic surveys to identify genuine street vendors and hand them identity paper and licenses to vend. But as you know, the administration in a country does not run smoothly. However, several states have not carried out survey for years, leaving a very large number of street vendors outside the legal system. Now, this mapping will identify who they are, how many are covered by which welfare scheme of the government, and the plan is to form committees at the level of collectors, then ask government departments to appoint nodal officers in each city and then bring them into the welfare schemes they are eligible for. So this is a very good plan. Now the Ministry of Housing and Urban Poverty Alleviation has written to states to waive the stamp duty or to charge the absolute minimum payable as per state laws whenever loans are dispersed, these 10,000 rupees loans, and the nodal ministry is Ministry of Housing and Urban Poverty Alleviation for this PM Swanidhi scheme. So this is about this. Then page number 7, just the headline, Statue of Unity gets a tourism boost. PM launches 17 projects. So 17 tourism projects around the Statue of Unity complex. So this is an effort to make it a tourism hub. And India has launched the first seaplane service around Statue of Unity. So that is why the PM was there to inaugurate that. Then Tamil Nadu governor gives assent to bill on 7.5 medical reservation. Now this is a horizontal reservation. See, there are two types of reservation, vertical and horizontal, right? Vertical means SC, ST, OBC, right? This is the vertical. Horizontal means within SC, within ST, within OBC. So this 7.5% is horizontal reservation for all the students who have studied in the state government schools and qualified in NEET for admissions to undergraduate medical courses. The 7.5% quota will be ensured for students who have studied from class 6 to 8. So every quota category, including a general, 7.5% seats would be reserved for those people who have completed their schooling or who have done these classes from the state, right? So this is vertical reservation and horizontal reservation. Then Sainik schools to have 27% OBC quota for students. So with the 21-22 academic year, they will start this. There are 33 such Sainik schools and they are run by a Sainik School Society, an autonomous organization under Defense Ministry. So who runs Sainik schools? The Sainik Schools Society under Ministry of Defense. According to government's policy, 67% of the seats in each Sainik school is for candidates from the state where the institution is located. The rest for candidates from other states. Now within these reservations, 15% seats are for SC, 7.5% for ST, and 27% for OBC non-creamy layers. Then just the headline, page 9, conversion just for marriage, unacceptable, rules Allahabad High Court. See, this is about the seaplane services. So these are the salient feature, water aerodromes. So sometimes the government ads that come in the newspaper, they are very, very important because they carry critical information about government schemes. So please make a point that you save those advertisements as well. So seaplane service, a new era of air travel in India. India's first commercial seaplane service, time travel between Statue of Unity, Kevadia and Sabarmati riverfront will reduce from 4 hours to 45 minutes. Generation of employment opportunities. Then this explained page, 98.6 degree Fahrenheit versus new normal. Why is body temperature declining over time? So it has been reported that the normal body temperature is not exactly 98.6 degree. It is lower than that. So it varies including 97.7, 97.9, 98.2, right? So there have been changes in the minimum temperature. So they conducted a study and they have come out with different conclusions, but those are not hard conclusions. They are based on different hypotheses. So they basically, this study, it studied the Tsimane people, an indigenous population in Bolivian Amazon, right? And this study, now they say the Tsimane had higher body temperature because their bodies had greater exposure to infection, and to fight this infection, there was higher inflammation in the body and that led to higher temperature, body temperature. Now what could be the reason for decreasing temperature? One of the probable reasons is better healthcare. Because of better healthcare, they are less exposed to infection. Their body has to fight less infection, so their inflammation levels are down. Then the second point is lower inflammation because they are taking anti-inflammatory drugs. Then they said that this briefer illness has also led to lower temperature. And finally, they are saying that the bodies are working less. We are leading a sedentary lifestyle throughout the world. So that is why our base metabolic rate has come down, and because of that our body temperatures are also down. So this is what this is saying. There's nothing much for me to explain. This also tells about the person, the German doctor Karl Reinhold August Wunderlich, who in 1851 pioneered the use of clinical thermometer. He took over 1 million measurements of 25,000 patients and published his findings in a book in 1868, in which he concluded that the average human body temperature is 98.6 degree Fahrenheit. So this is the trivia. So apart from that, there is nothing for me to explain here. I've explained the major points. You can read this. Then page 18, the world. France on alert as officials warn of more attacks after Nice killings. Protests erupt in several nations against French cartoons of Prophet Muhammad. Then in Taiwan, same-sex couples in military marry in first for Taiwan. So 2 lesbian couples, they tied knot in a mass wedding. Now you see the difference between China and Taiwan. In China, they prosecute the homosexuals, the LGBT community, and in Taiwan, they are celebrating them. Then strong earthquake kills 14 in Greece, Turkey. We've seen that. And global COVID cases rise by single day record of 500,000. So again, this is the second wave in Europe and America. As a matter of fact, America hasn't even crossed its peak. We really don't know what is happening there. So please, again, take care. Cases are rising in India as well.